Yes people, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at Scorcher for the Sega Saturn. Scorcher was developed by Scavenger Team and Zyrinx and published by Sega for the Saturn in 1997. Now, a couple of months ago I did a playthrough of this game and it was a very tough game to beat, so I thought I'd sit down and give you guys a little review of my experience with Scorcher on the Sega Saturn. So Scorcher is one of those games that spent quite some time stuck in development hell. The game started out life as a demo for the ill-fated 32X and then finally saw a release on the Sega Saturn in June 1997. Scorcher was reviewed by the official Sega Saturn magazine in issue number 20 and they gave the game an average score of just 70%. This is what Sega Saturn magazine had to say about the game.
Scorcher is visually one of the most impressive games to appear on the Sega Saturn, running at 30 frames a second with light sourcing and clever clip masking. A graphically excellent racing title where the gameplay appears to have been more an afterthought than an integral part of the game. The back of Scorcher's box reads vaguely as follows: negotiate the fastest, smoothest and most undulating 3D terrain ever created, in a future where your bike defies gravity and your opponents show no mercy. Atmospheric light sourcing and rendered graphics intensify the experience. So let's dive into the manual for a bit more info. The year is 2021 and the world has seen better days. War and pollution have disposed of large parts of humanity and most of the large cities of Earth have become abandoned wastelands. That's your classic 90s video game cliche, isn't it, that? Yeah, bleak apocalyptic future. Anyway, special speed bikes have been invented to travel from complex to complex along the highways. They almost sound like futuristic couriers and they're all racing to drop off the next parcel. Equipped with spherical force fields, these bikes allow the riders precise control during extremely high speeds. The invention started a whole new sport simply known as Scorcher. Ha! See what they did there? The name of the thing in the thing. Well, all I know is we passed 2021 a few years back and I can safely say that the only futuristic bikes we have now either say Uber Eats on the side or catch fire when you're charging them in the kitchen. So after spending a significant amount of time playing Scorcher over the last couple of weeks, the game doesn't play like any of your conventional racers of the time. If I had to sum it up, I'd say that Scorcher is a cross between Extreme G and Super Monkey Ball. Think of your 21st century futuristic bike as being more of a sphere with side shift than a bike, and you're well on your way to getting your head around how this game works. Now Scorcher's control scheme is a little bit on the wacky side. The D-pad is used to control the bike's left and right movement, which is expected, but pressing down will apply the brake for some reason. But don't worry, Scavenger Team left an option in there so you can change it back to how it should be. Anyway, the A button uses your bike's boost, B is accelerate and C makes your bike jump, leaving the L and R shoulder buttons to control the bike's left and right side shift. Using the side shift rolls your bike from left to right much tighter than just turning alone, and using it in a combination with the D-pad can help you take some of the game's more difficult corners at much higher speeds. Now this bonkers control scheme makes the game very unique to play, as it feels more like you're rolling a marble along the track and shifting it from left and right than actually playing a conventional racing game, which is quite interesting because at some points you cascade down tunnels and you can spin 360 onto the roof and back down again and launch yourself out the other end. But if you're not careful, more often than not you end up flinging your marble off the end of the track, because Scorcher's tracks do not have much in terms of barriers against the side to prevent you from just flying off, so be very careful when you're rolling your marble, people. One of the first things you will notice when playing Scorcher are the graphics, and very nice they are indeed too, especially for the humble Sega Saturn, a console that gets a lot of unnecessary flack when it comes to its 3D capabilities. With Scorcher we get nice clear looking textures with very minimal quad warping and a fairly good draw distance too. Scorcher also features transparency effects and coloured light sourcing throughout the game. All of this at nearly a consistent 30 frames a second to boot. Sounds great, doesn't it? So what's the catch? Well, for the most part Scorcher does hit that nice buttery smooth 30 frames a second that Scavenger were going for. However, the game does tend to dip below this a little too often for my liking. Frame dips mainly occur if there are quite a few bikes on screen, especially in some of the more detailed sections of the track, and having said that, the majority of the frame dips are so minor that it's hardly worth complaining about. But I will, and only because one particular section of the game's final track was so jarring that it almost drove me completely mad.
During one section on this track, Scorcher's frame rate decides to dip into single digit territory. This happens just as you come out of a corner at the crest of a hill onto a section of track that branches off two different ways. Here the frame rate dips so low that your controller almost seems completely unresponsive, leading you to fall off the track or get stuck here a lot. Trust me, this section of the final track will really test your patience, especially because the game only gives you a limited amount of continues. Speaking of tracks, each one of Scorcher's tracks is littered with green and blue power-ups for you to collect. Simply drive or roll your bike over them to pick them up, and these power-ups will refill both your bike's boost and jump abilities. The gauges for these can be found on your HUD just next to the comically large timer on the right hand side of the screen. Using boost power will also push the bike past its default speed limits, and your bike will maintain the extra speed from this boost until you either brake, hit a wall or fall off the track. So use your boosts wisely to keep the bike above its maximum default speed limit, otherwise you've got no chance of winning. On a subject of speed, be on the lookout for the green arrows littered around the track. Driving over these will reveal a line of boost pads that help propel you along. But be wary though, not all of these boost pads are as helpful as they seem, and some can send you flying off the track if you're not too careful. At its highest speed, Scorcher does become very twitchy in the controls department, and knowing the exact track layout then becomes essential. Speaking of which, Scorcher has a total of 6 tracks in all. 4 of these are unlocked by default and can be practiced at any time, and the remaining 2 tracks can be unlocked simply by reaching them in the game's championship mode on normal difficulty or above. Scorcher's first few tracks can actually be a lot of fun to play. Navigating the various jumps and obstacles while trying to overtake the other racers adds an element of danger to the racing. But once you reach the game's 6th and final stage, Scorcher, in my opinion, takes a massive turn for the worse. The Spiral, as it's known, is probably the toughest final race I've ever had to endure in any 32-bit game. The track has practically no sides or barriers to prevent you from falling off the edges, and at points is almost as thin and curly as a pubic hair. Trust me, this is one mother of a race, people, and honestly, very difficult to finish in first place. This brings me on to my main gripe with Scorcher. Sadly, the further you progress into the game, the more it begins to resemble a platformer, instead of the racing game that it's trying to be in the first place. Don't get me wrong here, I don't mind jumping the occasional hole in the road or skidding to avoid falling off the edge of the track, but it seems the further you progress into Scorcher, the more disconnected the game becomes, and before you know it, you feel like you're playing a platform game. The jumping becomes so frequent and frustrating at times that the game can virtually slow down to a crawl as you attempt to navigate these sections. To be fair, this is a massive shame because the first 3 or 4 tracks in the game flow really well once you get used to them. Even the 5th track, Downtown, isn't so bad if you're willing to put some practice in. But by the time you've managed to reach the game's final track, the Spiral, well, here the platforming gets rather slow, intricate and kinda messy. Attempting to control a sphere that's rolling backwards down a hill whilst jumping, trying not to fall off the edge of the track, avoiding other racers and remembering to boost can get very confusing and often result in a massive brain fart. It's almost as if the developers were way too distracted focusing on the graphics department and they completely forgot about the gameplay. All they had to do was remove some of the ridiculous platforming elements and the game would have been much better to play. Like I keep saying, the first few tracks are slick and fast, but by the end of the game, everything just becomes too slow and way too tedious. But to me, where the game really shines is in the music department. And if you like 90s club music, then you're in for a treat with Scorcher. The music has a very industrial and electronic vibe to it, and if you ask me, it fits the game's visual style perfectly well. Which is no surprise, as this kind of music does lend itself well to high-octane racing games. You've only got to look at Wipeout or Extreme G for great examples of games that benefited from a pumping soundtrack. Criticisms aside, Scorcher isn't really a bad game once you're used to the quirky controls and the strange game physics. The constant frame drops aren't enough to really spoil the gameplay, well, until you reach the Spiral that is, and the music is absolutely spot on. In this particular instance, I happen to agree with Sega Saturn magazine's review score here. Though Scorcher is clearly a visual treat on the Sega Saturn, it has flawed controls and falls short in the gameplay and features department, which makes the game sadly feel like a big missed opportunity. If Scavenger had maybe taken away some of the silly platforming elements, added a few more tracks, and maybe even a link cable or 2-player split screen mode, we could have really been talking here. But instead we get an impressive looking Sega Saturn game with loads of missed potential. Did any of you guys play Scorcher on the Saturn? If you did, let me know what you think of the game in the comments. If not, it's worth checking out, but sadly, it's just missing all those extra features that could have made this an essential purchase. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video.